The next thing we are going to talk about, gentlemen, is we are going to rank our top quarterbacks in college football going into the 25 season. And this is going to be interesting because I've already gotten a sneak peek at Bryan and Trevor's list here, and there are some differences. I'll just say that there are some differences that we will discuss and we will talk about, and we're gonna have some fun with this. But there's it's an interesting year for quarterback, Bryan, because there's just not a lot of returning production. There's a lot of new faces on the map. I'll just put it that way. So it's a very interesting year, Bryan, for quarterback. So why don't you set us up for kind of where we're going to be here with this list?
It was one of the harder quarterback years for me. Now, look, you never always get it right. You never go into season like, okay, this is my preseason prediction and this is what I had postseason. Because more likely than not, if your ranking is the same postseason as it was preseason, you're just kind of saying like, okay, I'm just going to go with what I said so I can look like I know what I'm talking about. Right? There's always guys that break out and perform well and do things that you don't expect to happen. But but there's at least some level of conviction about where you stand going into the season. And I had a much tougher time with that this year. And it's, part of it's the portal and things like that. But the other part of it is it's not so much the lack of proven production. Vince, there is that at like the best schools, there's a lack of proven production. There's a lot of quarterbacks coming back in college football, but it's more so like the best talents in college football are some of the least proven guys on this list. And so when we did our ranking, what I said in the criteria is you can pick anybody. This is a projection of the season in any way that you want to take it. So, my advice to Trev was if you want to completely project a guy that's never thrown a pass into the top 10, go for it. I'm not, because I want it to be broad in how you look at it. So you won't see me put CJ Carr in my list. Now we will talk about CJ Carr at the end, but you won't see me have CJ Carr on my list. You won't have me have Bryce Underwood on my list because I've never seen those guys throw a pass. It's kind of impossible for me to project them into being top 10. There's guys capable of it. We'll kind of have a who we also considered conversation at the end, but I just needed to see some level of I've seen it from this guy. And there's a difference, for example, between me saying, look, I think Arch Manning has a lot to prove, and still saying, but I saw the kid throw for almost 1,000 yards last year, start 2 football games, and then, make plays with his legs. That's different than saying, I haven't seen Bryce Underwood play a snap outside of what he did in high school. Or CJ Carr's not thrown. I haven't seen CJ Carr throw a pass in a real football game since he was at Salient High School in Michigan, playing against Bryce Underwood, as actually in his last game. So that's kind of where I'm at. But we can take it any way we want because it is a projection of what we think who the best quarterbacks will be. It's not a gauge of who they are right now.
Right.
It's not here's the most proven top 10 now. We are projecting how we think these guys are going to play into the season. And Trev said to me before the show, dude, I changed my top 10 like 5 times. And I was like, same. And we both had a guy in our top 10 that we initially submitted and then took that guy out. It was the same guy. And we've had him in, and then we're like, I'm not comfortable with it because, again, there's so much uncertainty. I think this guy could be there. I had about 8 or 9 guys. I'm like, I could see this guy being in the top 10.
Yep.
And it was tough. So for me, my list, guys, I put a lot into. I have a lot more confidence in some of the run throw guys this year than I do some of just the drop back guys this year. And my list to reflect that. But yeah, Trev, it was a challenge. And you and I usually, when we do lists, we laugh because we're very similar. Yeah. We only had 5 of the same guys.
Yeah. To your point, this was a very, very tough, difficult list for me to put together because, one, it's so open, which is also what makes it fun, right? We don't want everything to be, which is why I'm happy this isn't a list of, all right, who's the top 10 entering the season, because I think our list would look relatively similar, if not identical, if it was entering into this season. So to give you guys a background, Bryan explained to you guys how he built his list. Mine was a little bit different because we could take it however we wanted. I put a lot of emphasis into experience coming into the season because it's going to play into my second point of what each quarterback is going to mean for the success of their team and the projection of how far they can take that program. And yes, football's a team sport. It's not just about the quarterback. The quarterback gets a lot of attention. And as we know, they will play a big part in how good or how bad the team may be week over week. Prime example is Jalen Milroe was a pretty competent quarterback as a thrower in 2023. They made the playoffs. Last season, he digressed, and they didn't make the playoffs. But they also had tools like Ryan Williams. So I took things like that into account for me because it's a lot of different ingredients there. But just so you guys have a background of who all is on my list, but because of that criteria, it was really hard for me to leave off some of the people that I left off. And it'll make more sense when you hear who's not on my list as this begins to unfold. But yeah, this was a difficult one to put together, man. It was fun though.
All right, so we're going to jump into this thing, and we're just going to talk about it as we go. We're going to go 10 up, right? We're going to start with Bryan, then we're going to go to Trevor. We're going to kind of go back and well, you're going to do your bottom.
We'll do 6 to 10.
I mean. Yep.
Yeah, and then I'll do my
6
6 to 10. Then Trevor will do his. Then I'll give my 5 to 1. Trevor will do his 5 to 1, and then we'll then talk about sort of some of the other players not on the list, why certain guys, and then Vince. I know you're going to pepper us with some questions about our list, which is. Vince was like, hey, I don't want to do a ranking. I just want to bust your guys' chops about it. He didn't quite say it like that, but that was what he inferred.
Yeah.
That's what he texted me outside of the group chat. It was crazy.
I figured.
I just want to give you guys a hard time for your list. Yeah. I'm not willing to put my list out there. Yeah. I just want to bust your guys' chops.
Well, the best part about that is there's no way your list can be wrong then.
That's correct. I believe me.
Yes.
Been married long enough.
At the end of the year, you're like, well, if I would have done a list, I would have definitely had that guy on there.
I had plans to make a list.
Yes. Oh man!
In my mental list, he was definitely number.
That's one. Right. The list you can't see, only me.
That's right.
But no. Anyway, so it's gonna be very interesting because there's going to be a lot of discrepancy at your bottom half of both of your lists, right? Yeah. The top half is just kind of like different order, more or less.
To a degree, we have one guy that we have 4 of our 5 are the same guys, but in different order.
Right. Yeah.
But there's 3 of our 5 because you have. I'm looking at this list. No, it's 4 of the 5. It's just we have one guy very different. Now, one of his in his top 5. He has a guy in his top 5. I don't have my top 10.
Right.
One of my top 5s is in his top 10. So we're going to talk about that. It's going to be
all right. So without further ado, Bryan, this is the bottom half of your top 10. So this is 10 through 6. Kind of give us your 5 guys here at the bottom half of your top 10 and some reasoning as to why.
What I'm trying to figure out is how the triple option hater is the only guy giving love to Blake Horvath.
I'm shocked.
I am wanting to know what's going on with my people in this. Vince, you should be ashamed of yourself because you played in the triple option in high school. I did. So, you should be the guy that's out here pounding the table being like, Trevor, I don't know that we can still be friends because you don't have a triple option quarterback in your top 10. But in all seriousness, guys, I genuinely believe that Blake Horvath is one of the 10 best quarterbacks in college football. This has nothing to do with the NFL draft for me. It's nothing. It's about being an impact player in college football. And when I look at Blake Horvath, I see a guy that's a difference maker. And Trev, you made a point too earlier that I thought was a very good point is, part of being a big time quarterback is, as opposed to a system quarterback is if you go down and the next guy comes in and does the same exact thing, then you're kind of a product of the system. Are you an elevator? Are you a guy that makes the people around you better? And when you go look at the Navy offense, when he didn't play or was banged up and not his normal self, they were a completely different team. And then when he got healthy again against Army and then against Oklahoma, back to looking like they were most of the year. And so he's a difference maker, guys. You look at the production, 1,246 yards rushing, 1,353 yards passing, 30 total touchdowns in only 12 games, only threw 4 picks, was a 57.6% passer last season, so very efficient. I think Blake Horvath is an outstanding quarterback and in my opinion, one of the 10 toughest quarterbacks to game plan for. He obviously is a guy that produces a lot of touchdowns, and he's just a guy that, to me, that Navy team is way better last year because of him. A lot of the guys around him, same dudes they had the year before. But when you put him in that lineup and he's now the guy, it was a very different football team than what you're going to see. It's kind of hard to say, well, if he played for so-and-so because he runs a different offense, but it's not a coincidence that they went from just really the mediocre offense they were. They almost doubled their points per game output last year. They went from 17.7 to 31 And if he doesn't miss those games, and you look at their point production in those games, they're close to doubling their yardage output. And I know they had a new OC, but I've said this a million times, Vince, and this is the one thing you and I agree on. If you don't have a really good quarterback in the triple option, you won't have a really good triple option quarterback. Correct. And Blake Horvath is absolutely that guy for me. So he's number 10 for me.
We've seen it enough, Bryan, just to your point about triple option. I mean, if you better have a quarterback, because the quarterback can make everybody else so much better. I mean, because he's the one making the decisions about who gets the ball and why. And so if you don't have a quarterback that can make that happen, not only making the decisions, but then also obviously being an athlete and being able to throw the ball a little bit doesn't hurt. But if you don't have that quarterback that's literally pulling the trigger and doing the different things, the triple option is useless. It's useless because you're guessing. You're guessing.
That's why Navy was even under Coach Niumatalolo, they were just, this is why their offense went like this a lot.
Right.
Because when they had, Ricky, what was his name?
Ricky,
oh, goodness gracious. The kid they had in 2010. I cannot believe I'm forgetting his name. It was just give me a second. I'm going to pull it up. But then you had Malcolm Price. You had Will Worth, the kid they had in 2016, Ricky Dobbs. And then in the years where like they didn't have a guy like that, you remember like the couple years under Ricky Dobbs, they were really good. And then they had Chris Proctor at quarterback, and he was not Ricky Dobbs. And their offense struggled a little bit. The next year was year one of Keenan Reynolds, and they were pretty good, but he was still young. And then all of a sudden you get into like prime Keenan Reynolds, and Navy all of a sudden starts winning a bunch more games, and they're a much more impactful offense. And then, of course, you get his last year of Keenan Reynolds. Navy goes 11-2 and finish in the top 25. And Keenan Reynolds is an absolute monster. And I believe that Keenan Reynolds was a top 10 Heisman Trophy winner. And we talk about how great Keenan Reynolds was. Keenan Reynolds in 13 games had 1,200 passing yards, 13 plus 100 rushing yards, and accounted for 32 touchdowns in 12 games. If you actually look at the per game production, Blake Horvath was more productive on a per game basis, yards and touchdowns, than what Keenan Reynolds was in his big year at Navy. And that's why he's in my top 10. Number 9 for me is Garrett Nussmeier. This is a guy on my list that has the most room to rise. And the reason that I have Garrett Nussmeier 9 is a lot of people are going to focus on the yards. They're going to focus on, hey, he threw for over 4,000 yards last year, and he had 29 touchdowns and all the. But here's the thing: there's a lot more than just passing yards that has to go into this, because otherwise we'd be sitting here talking about how, the number one quarterback coming back in the country this year is Garrett Nussmeier. Number 2 is Josh Hoover. Number 3 is Chandler Morris. Number 4 is Baron Morton from Texas Tech. It's not about yards to me. It's about, you've got to also, production is key, is important, but it's also, there's a level of consistency that goes into it, and there's also a level of clutch play. And one of my let's talk about what I like about Garrett Nussmeier real quick. He's a gunslinger. I mean, he'll make throws where you're just like, he's going to throw more picks than most quarterbacks just because the way he plays, and I can live with that to a degree. He's got to avoid the, oh crap, I'm panicking picks. That's what hurts Garrett Nussmeier. And he's got to avoid just the highs and lows that we saw last season. There were times last year, guys, where Garrett Nussmeier looked like one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And then there were other times he looked like you might want to think about benching him. And at times, like the Ole Miss game, we saw both of that in the same game. And just that level of inconsistency we saw from him is really something that's got to get corrected. Now, he did finish the year really well. Last 3 games, he threw for 332 against Vandy. He threw for 277 against Oklahoma, 313 against Baylor. He was at least 8.9 yards per attempt in every game, and he had 7 touchdowns and 1 pick. He only had 1 pick in the last 4 games. So if he can continue that trend, then I think he's going to go higher on this list. But it's just the week-to-week consistency. But there's talent there. I also ding him a little bit because when you look at the yards, he threw for 4,000 yards, but he was minus on the season in rushing yards. He's minus 38. And so, he had 4,000 yards, but I can look at some other quarterbacks who had over 4,000 total yards because they weren't just passers. But he's still on my list at number 9. That's going to be lower than most have him, but I just watched too many big games where Garrett Nussmeier just was a part of the problem for LSU to put him anywhere higher. But the tools there, guys, are really good, and I could see him I could see Garrett Nussmeier jumping into the top 5 this season. He's just got to be more consistent. That's the thing.
Well, and he's going to have his opportunity right off the bat when is it at Clemson or is it a neutral site?
At Clemson.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's going to have his opportunity right off the bat.
Not everyone's like Lincoln Riley. Some programs are willing to actually play tough teams and even go on the road and play tough teams. So.
Well, I will say, though, Garrett Nussmeier does benefit from the fact that I think the rest of their big games outside of Alabama are at home, right? Well, Ole Miss is on the road. But they get, they're getting Florida at home. They get A&M at home. They get Arkansas at home. They get, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I'll just leave it at that. So
and he had a couple rough games at home last year. Alabama was a rough game. Ole Miss was a weird game because he made some money throws down the stretch. But he was part of the reason that they were also losing for much of that game.
Yeah, right.
And that's something he's going to have to improve upon. Somebody said, well, he threw for 405, he threw for 337 yards against Ole Miss. I'm like, he threw 51 passes. He was 6.6 yards per attempt. If you throw 51 passes, you should at least get to 400 yards.
That's stat stuff.
300 yards. Yeah, exactly. So there were a lot of games like that. He threw for 405 yards against Texas A&M on 50 attempts. He also had 3 terrible interceptions in that game. In a blowout loss. So yards aren't the only story. He could go higher. He's like Blake Horvath, to me, is going to be in the bottom 3 or 4 the whole year. Garrett Nussmeier could, in my opinion, could potentially jump in the top 3 if he can be more consistent. And that's going to be the key. Yep. Haynes King is my next guy, fellas. For him, the thing with Haynes King is just going to be about staying healthy. But when he was on the field last year, he was a difference maker. And then we saw that it wasn't just the Georgia game either. We saw that at times last year. He's the reason that the Louisville game was even close with some of the throws he made in that game. He's the only reason the Syracuse game was even close. Games they lost. He missed 2 whole games. And against Miami and NC State, he only combined for 9 pass attempts as he just kind of came off and threw a couple balls and couldn't really play a lot. But so if you really think about it, his production, he threw for a little under 2,100 yards. And he only played, I think, 9 games last season. 14 touchdowns, 2 picks. The 2 picks was the big thing for me, guys, because the one knockout we had on him last year, the thing was he was borderline on our list last year because he made a ton of plays. But what we said was he's got to limit the turnovers. He turned the ball over way too much in 2023, threw 16 interceptions. Last year only threw 2. He threw one against Georgia State in game 2 and threw one against Vanderbilt in a bowl game. But he's just a warrior. The kid he plays hard. He can make plays with his legs. He had 587 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns last season. So he had 25 touchdowns, basically playing, I think, 9 games is what he played. So it'd be 1, 2, let's see here. He played like full games. He played 7, 8, 9 full games last year and rushed for over 500 yards, threw for over 2,000 yards, had 25 touchdowns. So if he's healthy, I think he's going to be good. And the other thing that's going to help him too is he had small receivers last year. Malik Rutherford comes back in a small, but I have a feeling that Haynes King and Isaiah Canyon are going to become very good friends this year. And having that 6'3" vertical type of weapon is going to be a huge benefit to Haynes King as Isaiah Canyon goes into his second year. So I'm a big Haynes King fan. He won me over last year because he was better protecting the football without becoming afraid to throw it. And that was the big thing. So I'm a big Haynes King fan, but Trevor's got to stay healthy. I know you're going to talk about that. I know you may not have to talk about it, but that was the reason Trev told me he didn't have Haynes King in the top 10, which is very fair. He's got to show that he's healthy. Number 7 on my list, guys, is John Mateer from Washington State. He's a guy that I had a hard time placing because if you look at the production, he's a top 5 quarterback, and there's a lot of people hyping him up as a top 5 quarterback. 3,139 passing yards last year, averaged 9 yards per pass attempt, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks, 164.09 passer rating. Those are all excellent numbers in only 12 games. Then he also rushed for 826 yards and 15 more touchdowns. So you're talking about a guy that was right under 4,000 yards, had 44 touchdowns last season, only threw 7 interceptions. My concern, however, is he did that against mostly a group of 5 schedule. They played Portland State, San Jose State, Boise, Fresno, Hawaii, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, who basically looked like a G5 team last year, and then Wyoming. He didn't play in the bowl game against Syracuse. I really wish he would have, but I understood why he didn't. But the production was there, and you look at some of the better teams he played. He threw for a lot of yards against Boise State in a game they got blown out. And he didn't throw for a lot of yards against Texas Tech. He went 9 of 19 for 115 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. And you're like, well, that's not real good. Allow me to finish, please. He ran for 197 yards and a touchdown. Like, that's what makes him impactful. Is there are games he's not throwing the ball great, but he can still really hurt you because of his ability to be a dynamic runner. And I do think his running ability translates well to playing in the SEC. I think he's athletic enough to make some plays. He also rushed for 62 yards against Washington in the game. He also passed for 245 yards. So he did have some, P4 experience last year, and he had solid moments in those games. I don't know that he lit any of those teams up, but he had some good moments, and he was good against Boise, but he didn't really impact the game, Trevor, in a way where they could then go toe to toe. A lot of those yards were kind of, you're getting whooped, you're behind, and some of that production. But he's a good football player. In that Oklahoma offense, you're going to get Deion Burks back. You're going to get some guys back from injury. Get Jay Knott coming in at running back. Here's the big thing for me too, guys. I get real nervous about guys going from basically the G5 level, which essentially is what Washington State was, who they played, and he was certainly that before, and then they make the jump to the Power 4 level. But what's going to help John Mateer is his OC is going with him. So the guy that, his OC knows him. He knows the OC. He knows the offense, which is going to help those other guys kind of – I think having that will help him get everybody else up to speed in a way that was different for, let's say, like a Riley Leonard going from a Duke to a Notre Dame, where he's the only guy that really went.
Sure.
So I think that'll help him. That'll help him as well. So I have him number 7. And then number 6 for me is Josh Hoover. And Josh Hoover, more than any quarterback on this list, is an example of why, for me, this is not a NFL draft list. This is a college football list. I really like Josh Hoover as a college quarterback. He doesn't have a monster arm. He doesn't have this guy's a first-round top 10 NFL draft pick. But what he does is he produces and he plays a fun style of play. He's not a guy that is necessarily a runner. It was minus 19 yards last year. But he can move around in the pocket and buy time and climb and escape and all that, guys. But he threw for 3,949 yards last year, completed over 66% of his passes with 8.4 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, 11 picks. He had over a 151, passer rating last season. Had some games where he's going to have to play better than he did against certain games. But, he was a big reason why TCU improved last season. He had some starts in 2000 as a redshirt freshman in 2023 in a year where TCU struggled, came on late in the year, had some monster games down the stretch and games where, again, they lost. But his last 4 games of 2023, when he was thrust into the starting lineup, last 6 games, he threw for 439 against BYU, 353 against Texas Tech. He had 302 against Texas in a game they almost knocked off Texas. He threw for 412 against Baylor, and then he threw for 344 in a game where they lost to Oklahoma by 25, but they scored 45 points. It wasn't exactly the offense's fault. And then he comes out last year and he continues the same thing. 353 against Stanford, 396 at SMU in a game they lost by 24, but they scored 42. They gave up 66. He threw for 356 against Kansas, 344 against Texas Tech, 333 against Baylor, and ended the season in a bowl game against Lafayette with 252 yards, but 4 touchdowns. So highly productive. I think he's an elevator. He makes the guys around him better because he's smart. He throws with good timing. He knows where to go with the football. Not a big-time NFL draft prospect, but a really good player in college football that produces. And when you take over a team that's 5-7 and you lead them to a 9-4 season, you've told me that you're able to make that football team better. And that's what Josh Hoover showed me last year, and that's why he's number 6 on my list.
So the fun part about these lists, by the way, and if I have the correct list written down in front of me, we're going to see Trevor's list 10 through 6 next, and you're going to see one name that is the same 6 through 10.
In the same spot.
In the same spot. That's correct. In the exact same spot, which I find very fascinating. And just as a teaser, as a carrot moving forward, they have one other guy in the exact same spot in their 1 through 5 list. And that's it. There's only 2 guys that are in the exact same spot. So, or actually 3, excuse me. But anyway, let's head over to Trevor's list here. Trevor, I'm going to give you the floor. to start talking about your list. I may interject here and there, maybe to ask you a clarifying question or two. But let's move over to your list, starting at number 10, moving all the way up to number 6.
Yeah, you got it. In the same light, and we were talking about this before the show, in the same light that Bryan's not a triple option guy and he has Blake Horvath at number 10, you guys know what my feelings are about Nebraska, and they are very much in show me mode, which I'm sure brings a lot of questions as to why my number 10 quarterback is Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, which is fair. That is a fair question, and I understand that completely. Now, look, here's the thing with him. I do think if Nebraska, and this is going to be a common theme for some of the quarterbacks that I have on this list, if Nebraska is going to play to their potential, I think Dylan Raiola has to be at the center of that conversation. I like the pieces that they added in the transfer portal. Matt Rule's going into his 3rd year. Dylan Raiola is going into his 2nd full year as a starter. Now, he has started 13 games at the college level. He did it last year as a true freshman, went 7-6. He had 2,819 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 67.1 completion percentage as a true freshman. Now, that is a number that stuck out to me. Turnovers have to get corrected. But 67% completion percentage as a true freshman in the Big Ten, that's impressive. And that's you remove the name from it, the school from it. That is an impressive statistic. A lot of Dylan Raiola for me is projection. I love the tools. I love the size. I really like his arm talent. He made some true freshman mistakes last season, and that was evident when you watched him play. Now, on top of being a starting true freshman at Nebraska, he was also kind of brought into – it wasn't like a situation where like when Everett Golson was a redshirt freshman starter at Notre Dame, he had a lot of really good pieces around him. Dylan Raiola came in as an 18-year-old, and they were like, hey, turn this program around, and went 7-6 as a starter and won their bowl game against Boston College. That's impressive to me. Now, he has a long way to go in showing me what that truly means. I mean, Nebraska as a team, they dropped 5 of their last 6 regular season games, and their only win was against Nebraska, but they did bounce back and beat Boston College in a bowl game. Now, where his numbers need to improve, obviously interceptions need to go down, but he also averaged 6.8 yards per attempt over the course of the season. That is partially why his completion percentage was at 67% as a true freshman. A lot of dump off passes, a lot of checkdowns. But with that being said, there are some other quarterbacks throughout college football that as sophomores, juniors, seniors aren't willing to take checkdowns. And that's something that Dylan Raiola, I guess, has mastered. I guess who said it on the show? Somebody called somebody checkdown Charlie. So maybe that's
yeah. That wasn't me. I called the Ian Book Captain Checkdown.
Yeah,
okay, Captain Checkdown.
That's
I think that was a Bill Bender quote, wasn't
Okay.
it?
Was it? Okay,
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
But that is something that he's going to have to get more comfortable with, and something that I'm confident projecting in somebody going into their 2nd full year as a starter. Then you add in the transfer portal additions. Then you add in Matt Rule going into his 3rd year. So Dylan Raiola is on my list. I had trouble between him, Haynes King, and Blake Horvath at this spot. That was a really tough, like legitimately, if we were doing votes out of, say, 100, I mean, Raiola probably had 34, another player had 33, the next guy had 32, how that math works out. Point being, it was very, very close. But Dylan Raiola for me is in my 10th spot. The 9th guy is the spot that Bryan and I have the same, and that's Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. Now, I do also believe we're in the same boat, Bryan. I think he has the opportunity to rise up on this list, but he needs to clean up his performance, specifically in big games. He had 5 interceptions between the Alabama and Texas A&M losses. He did put up a lot of yards, finished number 5 in college football, but in bigger moments, he performed poorly. And that's not just going back and looking at the box score and seeing, okay, what all did he do? You go back and you look at where he is. He has 14 career starts. He's 10-4 as a starter, going into his 2nd year as the full-time starter. But he is very much a gunslinger. With quarterbacks with his play style, I don't pay too much attention into total number of interceptions, as long as what Bryan said, they're not the bad interceptions or too many of them where it's just what is that?
You got to live with couple of them.
100%.
Because that's what makes him good too, is that gunslinger mentality, right?
Absolutely.
So, let me ask both of you guys, since you both had him at number 9, right? So he was throwing the ball all over the place. You said it 51 times, all these different things. LSU's got to have a better run game, right? If Garrett Nussmeier,
I think they will.
If Garrett's going to jump up the list here, he's going to have a complimentary run game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, to a degree. I mean, that's not really who LSU is, but I think they will. I really like Caden Durham.
Yeah.
And now the biggest question for me though, Vince, is not the run game. I think Caden Durham showed some things last year. Didn't play the first game of the year. Only had 5 carries for 4 yards in Nicholls State in game 2. Only had 6 carries for 14 yards in game 4. But he still finished with 753 yards and 5.4 per carry and 6 touchdowns. LSU's going to throw the ball a lot. I think they do need to complement the pass game better. But I think the bigger question for me, Vince, when it comes to and Trevor, I wonder if this is part of what factored in for you as well, why Nussmeier's lower for me than he is for others, is I don't think Garrett Nussmeier is like a great scrambler, and he doesn't handle pressure like and I don't mean like game pressure, like he punks in big situations, because like just the ending of the Ole Miss game alone should show you that that's not what I mean. I mean like actual pass rushing pressure, he doesn't handle real well. Saw that against especially against Texas A&M. I have major questions about their offensive line.
Yeah.
That's a bigger question for me. And
Gotcha.
and I don't know that he can handle that. That could limit him a little bit. Plus, he's got a bunch of new receivers.
Yep.
But if those things handle themselves, then I think he could, and he can do what Trevor said, limit some of the bad turnovers, just be a little bit more consistent. Then I think he's got every opportunity in the world to rise up this list.
Well, and when it's a part of your play style, sometimes you just live with it. Dabo Swinney learned to live with some of the horrible turnovers Deshaun Watson had the year they won a national championship. He had 16 picks that year. And so really just kind of depends on the nature of them, what all it looks like, because there is a world where they could sit down Garrett Nussmeier. It's like, hey, you got to stop turning the ball over more. But he won't be the same type of player. Just wouldn't be. And that's what Dabo Swinney said about Deshaun Watson. He was asked leading up to the national championship, hey, like, do you have to kind of have conversations with Deshaun about taking care of the ball? And it's like, look, then he wouldn't be able to do the things that make him so great. And I think Garrett Nussmeier is looked at in a similar light, not in the same view as Deshaun Watson, but play style wise, it's more the same. And I'm staying consistent with, you know what, man, sometimes Brian Kelly just randomly catches fire and they have a good season. And Garrett Nussmeier would be at the center of that if that were to happen. Putting together some transfer portal receiving cores and having a good season. So he's my number 9 quarterback. My number 8 quarterback on this list is DJ Lagway, the quarterback at Florida. Now, he is somebody where the kind of the weight of the season, the success of Florida this upcoming season falls heavily on the shoulders of DJ Lagway. I like some of the supporting cast that they have, but you go and you look at what he's done. DJ Lagway has started 7 games in his career. He's actually 6-1 as a starter. He was one of the big reasons why Florida helped turn around, or why Florida's season kind of turned around at the end there after a really rough-looking start. Now, some of the questions with him. He had 9 interceptions last season. However, 4 of his 9 interceptions came when he wasn't the starter, but came in off the bench in more of a relief role. I'm not saying that makes the interceptions better or worse, but as we've all talked about before, being the backup and coming in, you prepare a little bit differently than what you would as when you know that you're going in as a starter. You prepare differently in the week of practice. You prepare differently the day of. So that was a factor for me in some of his turnovers. Now, health is a question for me. Now, he is one of the higher ceiling quarterbacks on my list. He kept them in the game. I mean, the Georgia-Florida game was looking like it was going to turn into an interesting one until he got knocked out of the game. Then you start hearing about some of the shoulder soreness that he's having so far this offseason. That was also a question mark for me. But when I go and I look overall, I like what he brings to the table. A lot of people are going to assume that he's a dual threat guy. He's not. He's a pass-first quarterback. He only had 101 rushing yards last season in 7 starts. I don't think he had any rushing touchdowns either. So he had 1,915 passing yards, 12 passing touchdowns. Interceptions need to get cut back a little bit, but I think some of that will happen organically as he is allowed to prepare more as the full-time starter. But I have him at 8, mostly for what he means to Florida's team. A lot of their success is going to ride off of the performance of DJ Lagway, so that's where I have him in this one. At number 7, I have a guy that kind of gets forgotten about a little bit. And I think some of that is because of how he ended his season last year. And that's Kevin Jennings. That's the quarterback at SMU. Now, Kevin Jennings was off to a tear. He was the talk of the town. Everybody was talking about him. SMU's going to the ACC Conference Championship game. You know, he comes in, he replaces Stone, I believe. He took over for Stone after the
Preston
BYU
Stone,
game.
yeah.
Yep. Now, he has 13 career starts. He's 10-3 as a starter. Last season, not even starting the full slate of games, he had 3,245 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 354 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. He was a very electric playmaker for that offense last season. And if SMU wants to kind of prove some of the doubters wrong, doubters in terms of they didn't deserve to make the playoffs, that crowd, he's going to kind of be the focal point of this offense again, saying, hey, look, last season wasn't fluky. We are a good football team. Unfortunately for him, how he ended his season is just recency bias. It's how people remember Kevin Jennings. 3 interceptions against Penn State, 2 of them returned for touchdowns. But people are very quick to forget the comeback that he helped lead SMU in the ACC championship game. They're very quick to forget how he performed against UNLV, other teams in the regular season, where SMU was a good football team. And so that for me was kind of the separating factor with him. Now, I have to do more research on my end around what he has coming back, because I know SMU coming back
a decent amount. They lost some guys, got some guys back,
Okay.
got some guys new, and that shouldn't be too much of an issue skill-wise. Okay. O-line is a little bit more of a question mark for me.
Okay. But for Kevin Jennings, he's somebody that is going to look to build off of his season last year. Like I said, 10-3 as a starter, stepping in and leading SMU to their first college football playoff and a bid, their first season in the ACC, into the ACC Conference Championship. That carries a little bit of weight for me, and I think he's going to use some of that momentum moving forward. Then to round out my 10 through 6, I have Lenore Sellers at South Carolina. Now, he is one of the more polarizing quarterbacks. There are some people that I've seen some lists that have him as the number 1 overall quarterback coming back in college football this season. I have some people that I've seen some lists where they don't even have him ranked in the top 10 of returning quarterbacks. I fall, as you guys see, somewhere a little bit in the middle. I have no pushback if anybody wants to rank him higher. I totally get it, because it's about upside and projection. But when you look at him, he has 12 career starts. He's 8-4 as a starter. He started, I believe, did he start every game last season for South Carolina?
No, he got hurt against LSU and then missed the next week against Akron.
Okay.
Because that was the game, remember, I've said, if he doesn't get hurt, South Carolina beats LSU last year.
Yeah, that's right.
Because then they put in Robbie Ashford, and he had some really bad turnovers and plays. And
But Lenore Sellers, I mean, he is an electric playmaker, man. I mean, he is a dual threat quarterback. He passed for 2,534 yards last year, 18 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He rushed for 674 yards and added 7 rushing touchdowns on the ground in 12 games. Now, he had breakout games last season against Texas A&M, Clemson, put up video game numbers against Missouri. So he is a dual threat aspect to that offense. Now for him, it's, can you take that next step into year 2 as a starter? Can you become not just the flashy playmaker, make crazy plays with your arm, but can you truly manage a game? I think sometimes game managers can get too bad of a rep, but there are times when we saw it in 2012 with Everett Golson, electric playmaker. Sometimes you need to settle down a little bit, be the playmaker you are, but also do what you can to live within the offense. I don't view that, depending on how it's brought up, as negatively, but sometimes Sellers, when you go back and pop in the film, sometimes he just needs to learn to take what the defense gives him and not try to make a Heisman moment.
Right.
You know what I mean? Sometimes hey, it's okay to take the 5-yard check down. You don't have to scramble around in the backfield because you're so athletic and take that 11-yard sack, and so that's where he lives for me. He has room to move up because he's a very exciting playmaker. But I have him at 6 for now. It'll be fun to reevaluate him as the season ends and goes on.
Yeah, he is the player. I'll say this, Trev, that grew the most in my rose in my rankings the most as I started studying more film and breaking these kids down watching film, looking beyond the numbers and just watching film, he would have been at the bottom of my top 10 when we would have done this list earlier in the year.
Sure.
And he's now much higher on my list. So if people are like, I don't think there's some people in the chat like, I don't think he's as good. Like, if you guys think that, then you're going to hate my list when you get to my top 5. If you're busting Trevor's chops for having Lenore Sellers 6, you guys are going to hate me in a minute. So